as a 21-year-old starting at, Microsoft, I thought that what I needed to do was become more masculine, more dominant, less feminine, and kind of emulate those around me that were successful. And I think that was a huge mistake earlier in my career. It didn't feel authentic. It led to burnout. It made me feel like there was always some sort of friction. And I think over my career, I learned a lot from others that lean into femininity, lean into who you are. And that's actually where you're going to start having that success.
Welcome to the She's So Sweet podcast, where we interview accomplished women who have worked their way to the C-suite. I'm your host, Kristi Faltorusso, Chief Customer Officer and award-winning customer success executive. I am so excited to introduce today's guest. We have with us today Lauren Goodell, who's the founder and CEO of Zinnia. Hi, Lauren. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to jump right in today. So, Lauren, why don't we get started by telling us a little bit about yourself, your role. Tell us about Zinnia.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent about 10 years in enterprise sales between LG, Microsoft, and Salesforce, and I built the tool that I wish that I had. So Zinnia is a platform that helps enterprise account executives close more deals by better understanding the other human on the other end of the deal and guiding every next action of the way.
All right, you got to tell me. So, what are the types of insights you're teeing up? Because I understand the complexities of enterprise sales. So, what information are you arming us with?
Yeah. So when we are helping our clients, we pull their named account list, we pull their calendar, we pull everything and saying, here's the people that are going to be involved in the deals that you need to close. And not only do we give the professional background, so who is Kristi? What does she do? What's her role? What's her tenure? But then we also will analyze everything else that we can find about Kristi. So the way that you write online, the way that you interact with others, the way that you show up on podcasts. Are you emotive? Are you serious and stoic? And so actually what Zinnia says about you is that you're innovative, empowering, and supportive to women. So I think all of these things are right on par with obviously.
I would personally, I'm going to say, yes, Zinnia, got it right. Nailed it. That's so cool. So all right. Obviously I love innovation always comes out of need and usually pain. How did you get started? Because so many people are sitting on great ideas, but obviously you ran with it. So how did you go about building this company?
Yeah, our story was not a linear one, which I think every single startup has that same kind of, ups and downs of a storyline. But we actually were launched out of the Atlanta Venture Studio. So if you're familiar with Calendly or SalesLoft or Terminus,
I think some of us might be familiar with some of those products. Yes.
You may have heard of them, but they all went through the Atlanta Venture Studio as well. And so we're a company, one of the first 10, I guess, companies that have gone through. And what that looks like is they choose a founder that they really like, and they, agree on an area or an industry that they're both passionate about. So I knew I wanted to work in the go-to-market space. I knew I wanted to build something. And they said, great, we'll fund whatever you want to work on in this space. So we actually started doing something wildly different. We were working with sales kickoffs and QBRs, and how do we actually bring that human element and drive revenue and drive, really effective leaders and sales reps. But through that process, we learned a ton and kind of pivoted into where we are today.
That's great. And now what does the company look like? Tell me, so, to the extent that you're willing and able to share, how big are we now?
Yeah. So we went through a big transition about a year ago where we were doing these events and these sales kickoffs, and we are actually profitable. We were doing really well, and we were growing really quickly. But after taking venture capital dollars, we're not here to build a lifestyle business, right? We're here to build $1 billion company. And what we realized was, okay, we can build this and it could be great tech-enabled services, but it's never going to be a scalable unicorn. So we ended up selling off that type of side of the business to an events company in Atlanta, including the employees, and went back down to just myself and brought in a new co-founder and CTO who could help actually build the tech side of things. So that was a year ago. Fast forward, now we have an awesome UI UX designer. We've got, some wonderful interns, developers, things like that.
That's fantastic. Now, how hard was it to make that pivot? Because these are not easy decisions to make. And I know CEOs and founders are faced with making hard decisions every single day. I get to watch it front row seat with my CEO. So what was that like to kind of come to terms with we've got to make this change and here's how we're going to have to do that?
You know what's interesting as you're leading a company is you can actually like feel some of these things, right? Like you'll feel when things are going really well. You'll feel when you're getting too much friction. And there was a moment where I was like, I know that this isn't right. And I know that while this is fun and we're growing, it's not the future vision of this company. And so I had a really hard time actually making that final decision because we had built such a great culture. We had so much fun. Our team was absolutely incredible. And I was worried first about my people. I was like, well, what's going to happen, when this other company takes over these contracts? Are they still going to enjoy it? And what was my number one priority was making sure that everybody landed well. And when I knew that that was going to happen, I felt really, really confident in this direction. But it felt tumultuous at the time, for sure.
I can imagine. That's not a small decision to make, but I love the human first leader in you and caring about your people. And this is a lot about who you are. So going back to who you are, I want to know who you thought you'd be. So my favorite question to ask everybody is, when you were little, because Lauren, I have to imagine that you weren't sitting around as young little Lauren thinking, I'm going to be the CEO and co-founder or founder of Zinnia. So what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
I have a very vivid memory, and I'm very close with my family. I have wonderful parents. My dad asked me, so what do you want to be when you grow up, Lauren? And I said, I think I'm going to be a hairstylist. Yeah. And he was like, okay, well, what type of life do you want to live? And I was like, I want to travel and I want to have a nice home. And my dad said, okay, well, that's a career where that might be a little bit more difficult. I said, well, that's okay. I'll marry someone that can. And my dad said, well, what if nobody wants to marry you? And he kind of said it facetiously, military dad. He loves me dearly. And I kind of had this like, oh crap moment. Like, you're right. I shouldn't wait for anybody else to build the life that I want to live. So decided to take a path into tech instead. A bit of a change, but
I love that. I love asking this question because it's always so interesting to me, like how people go from where they thought they'd be to where they are now. So I want you to kind of step back as far back as you can and tell me a little bit about what that journey's looked like. So obviously at some point you decided, okay, maybe hairstylist is not going to afford me the lifestyle that I so desire and deserve. So where did this kind of pivot take place for you? And then what happened after?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that was like middle school, high school time frame. And I definitely shifted my perspective of, what my future journey would look like and what my aspirations would be and where am I going to find fulfillment. So I decided to go to University of Nebraska, where I'm from, because of a scholarship that I had. So I went there, and during that time, I went into a marketing degree and had marketing internships, was part of this business fraternity. I just became obsessed with business and, building something from the ground up. And I had clubs I started and things I started, and it was just so much fun. But I actually really thought I was going to spend my career in marketing. And one of my internships, Microsoft was actually one of my clients. And I figured I would stay on at this marketing firm after college and stay in Nebraska, like most of my friends and family did. And Microsoft was like, hey, you should come apply for this marketing role. So I flew out to Chicago, I interviewed, and they said, I know you interviewed for the marketing role, but we actually think you'd be better at sales. What do you think about that? And I had never really considered it. And then I saw the 2 job offers and was like, sales seems like a little bit better of a fit.
See, that's where that lifestyle came into play. And you're like, Lauren's like, I think sales is the calling.
Yeah, I think I was born for this, actually. So that's kind of how I oopsied my way into tech, frankly. And I remember starting and, reading some of the things that I would be selling. And I was like, what's an SQL server? And they're like, that's a SQL server, Lauren. You're mispronouncing it in general. And having to actually learn tech from the ground up and talk the talk and walk the walk. But I just became obsessed with how technology can actually impact the world and impact business.
I love that. I love kind of hearing how that kind of goes full circle. It's so interesting to always hear like where people started this journey, even if it's just a thought, to how you ended up where you did. Okay, so I know that there has probably been some really significant pivotal moments for you along the way. Talk to me about that, because I know when we reflect back, you can't get to where you are with not having to make some bold decisions. We've just talked about some of those. What were those pivotal moments or decisions you had to make?
There's definitely been a couple pivotal moments in my career that have really changed my trajectory of where I ended up. I really did think I would stay at Microsoft my entire career. It's an incredible company. I loved the people I was working with. I learned so much all the time. But I had a great mentor that went over to Salesforce and was like, hey, I think you should come with me. I said, no, I'm planning on staying at Microsoft. I really love my career here. And they said, what's it going to take? I jokingly said double my salary. And they're like, all right. So I made a jump after 5 years at Microsoft to Salesforce to double my salary. And it was an incredible decision. One, because obviously from a perspective of now going off on my own and taking a big financial risk, it allowed me to kind of take that with a little bit more security. But two, I got to learn a completely different company culture. Microsoft is a tech company with a sales team, and Salesforce is a sales company with a tech team. So the way that they go to market, the way that they structure culture, the way that they train their employees is so wildly different. Both are incredible in different ways. And so I feel like now running a company, I have both perspectives and get to kind of pick and choose and be able to create my own, pathway for a company culture.
I want to talk about something because you brought up something that I think is important for women to think about. I don't think it's a conversation that we have enough as women. The financial freedom, right? And the liberating kind of way of life that we can, the lifestyle you can live when you do have financial security. Now, you talked about obviously making a bold decision and this pivot, which doubled your salary. It gave you I'm sure you saved some of that. I'm sure it all didn't go to shoes and bags like I do. So let's say you banked some of that. What were you thinking about when you think about savings and creating a financial foundation for yourself so that way you could go and eventually make some of these decisions?
I really actually still at the time wasn't planning on leaving to start a company. But I grew up with a humble background in Nebraska and, things and material goods have never really been that important to me. So I was like, hey, why don't I just put aside every possible bit that I can and retire early? That was really my plan. But what's funny enough is I sat down with my financial advisor and was like, yeah, if I stay in this role for X amount more years, then I could honestly retire before the age of 40 and I can get this done. And he's like, okay, and then what, Lauren? And I said, well, then I'd probably start a company. And he's like, so why don't you just do it now? And kudos to my financial advisor who is like, taking a huge risk on my finances by being the one to really push me and be like, no, go for this. You should really take that leap.
I mean, talk about leaning into your role. Maybe you give me his name and number. Sounds like they're offering some good advice. No, I think it's really important. And like I said, the reason I bring that up is because I don't think that we consider the importance of savings and building a foundation for ourselves. And, you hit on this earlier too, right? When your dad facetiously asked you this question, right? What if nobody wants to marry you? And you kind of go down this pathway of like, no, I'm going to build the life that I want for myself, by myself. And I think that there is something really important to be said about that because, we hear so many stories of women who maybe didn't make those decisions early. They may have married and they may have found themselves no longer in that relationship and now are trying to figure out, how do I build my foundation? How do I provide that level of security for myself, for my family? And so I just think it's an important thing for us to all consider as women because you don't want to be dependent on anybody, right? I don't think any of us wants to go and build a life where we're leaning on somebody else. We want to be able to thrive independently and make independent decisions and know that we are secure because we've designed a life like that for ourselves. So I just want to call that out because I am super impressed by people that make smart financial decisions. I am not one of those, but I am fortunate to be married to somebody who forces me to make smart decisions. So yeah, maybe it's a little advice to myself. Okay, well, listen, so we talked about some of these pivotal moments. I want to spend a minute on the Salesforce journey because I think so many of us look up to Salesforce, especially anybody who's been in the tech space for long enough. Everybody knows Salesforce. For those of you who listen, who don't know Salesforce, Google it. You might be living under a rock. That's okay. What was that experience like? Because we all look from the outside, in, and it is like one of those things that you kind of stare at with googly eyes and it's like the Mecca, right? Like we look at the culture, we look at the products, right? We look at the business success that it's had. Can you share some of what it was like to be an employee at Salesforce and how that really afforded you the ability to learn and build your future?
Yeah, I mean, my experience at Salesforce was incredible. I joined the Commerce Cloud team and I had the best boss ever. He was a rock star and my skip level, I guess, was a female that was running Commerce Cloud, which was very rare. I never saw that at other tech companies that I had worked for. So it was very cool to see women in leadership. And her name was Jenna, and she was a mentor to me and an advisor. And so I would reach out and ask for career, advice, mentorship. And she was just so hands-on and so helpful and supportive of my journey. So I think the one thing that I would say about Salesforce is each of the unique clouds, Commerce Cloud, Sales Cloud, all kind of have their own culture. And it's because it's a company built off of acquisitions. But I could only speak to commerce. It was incredible. People were really supportive. There was a lot of what I'd like to say co-opetition. So healthy competition between your colleagues, but everyone was so helpful at lifting each other up. It wasn't like this negative competitive environment. And the conferences were fun. They really lean into culture and, putting their employees first and leaning into the goofy brand. So it was a great experience.
I have a personal goal. One day I will be at Dreamforce. So that is my personal goal. One day, 1 year, I will be there to attend the most epic tech concert of my life. And that's how I will forever position that.
The She's So Sweet podcast is brought to you by Client Success. Client Success is an all-in-one customer success platform to help post-sale implementation and success teams manage customers from new to renew. Through an industry-leading platform approach, Client Success gives businesses an in-depth view into customer health, product usage trends, along with churn and risk data so that your team can not only retain customers, but help them grow as well. Whether it's managing customer onboarding workflows in shared portals, building custom health scores, tracking sentiment with NPS surveys, or doing more with less through AI and automations, Client Success gives customer success professionals a true one-stop platform to manage all aspects of the customer journey. To learn more about the industry's fastest to implement customer success platform, visit www.clientsuccess.com. That's Client Success. Simple, powerful customer success.
I think that it's very easy for us to talk about the positive things that we've navigated that have kind of helped and afforded us the opportunities that we have in front of us. But we know that nobody gets where they are without navigating some challenges. When you reflect back on your career, what were some of the big challenges or obstacles that you faced that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I will say that I've been lucky. I've had a lot of incredible leadership and direct teams and things like that. But I will also say that my first team at Microsoft, I was on a team of 18 people, and I was the only female. I was the only person under the age of 40 when I first started. Mm-hmm. So it definitely felt like being a fish out of water for a bit and trying to have to navigate finding my own path. What I also will say is, as a 21-year-old starting at Microsoft, I thought that what I needed to do was become more masculine, more dominant, less feminine, and kind of emulate those around me that were successful. And I think that was a huge mistake earlier in my career. It didn't feel authentic. It led to burnout. It made me feel like there was always some sort of friction. And I think over my career, I learned a lot from others that lean into femininity, lean into who you are. And that's actually where you're going to start having that success. So
how did you get comfortable with that authenticity, Lauren? Because that's something I feel like a lot of people struggle with, right? At some point, they realize okay, if and when they do that, they're like, why didn't I do this forever ago? Why didn't I always kind of live my authentic self? How did you identify that you needed to do that? And then how did you make that kind of pivot?
Oh my goodness. I actually do have one specific story of I was selling, I had moved to New Orleans with Microsoft, and I was selling to a large grocery chain, and the headquarters was literally in the middle of the bayou, this tiny little town. And I had my direct leader and my skip level fly in for this meeting. And it was a closing meeting, hopefully a negotiation meeting, if you will, for a $2 million contract. And, they showed up in suits and I showed up in jeans and Nikes, and they were like, "What are you doing?" I said, "You're in the bayou. We have to just show up and be comfortable." And we went in, and instead of putting something up on a whiteboard, and I, moved across the table and sat next to the prospect and was going line by line on my computer, showing him, and sat on his side of the table. And I was just I had built such a relationship with this customer that I knew that that's how he wanted to build business together, build relationships. But the vivid moment for me was walking out and my skip level looking at me and saying, I don't get it, but what you're doing is working. So just keep being you. And it was one of those things where it was like, oh, like this was so natural to me because this was an authentic relationship with this buyer that I'd built. I was in my own skin. I wasn't trying to be somebody that I wasn't. And to have the validation from a leader being like, it works, so just do it. And I've kind of leaned into it ever since.
I love that story so much. Like, what was your initial reaction though when they questioned, like, what are you wearing, Lauren? Like, was there a moment of panic, or were you so confident in like the fact that you knew that you were showing up the appropriate way for the relationship you had built? Because I think some people can be intimidated by leadership questioning them, and it could create self-doubt.
Yeah. Well, I tend to be a little bit more on the goofy side and a little bit more on the unserious side. So I think I remember at the time my response was, well, what are you doing with that pocket square? You got to lose that before we go into this meeting. I was like, this is not the place for that. And, I think leaning into the humor side is always kind of what I defer to as well.
I really appreciate that story. So listen, I know one of the other challenges when you and I were chatting, we talked about what it was like to like build your business and how hard it is for female leaders, founders specifically, to raise capital to build their business. Now, obviously you had the path that you went down with, kind of the incubator in Atlanta. What was it like to go and raise VC dollars as a woman?
Yeah. So for those listeners that don't know, less than 2% of venture capital dollars go to female founders. So that's a crazy statistic. Less than 2%. That's insane to me still to this day. But I think it's a really convoluted problem. So for context, this is my second company, and my last company coming out of corporate, I did not know what I was doing whatsoever. And we decided to raise capital, and I had to talk to over 80 investors before we got a single term sheet. And a term sheet is what they give you to say, we're going to invest in your company, and here's the terms that we're setting on the valuation. And it took me 80 times because, one, I didn't know what I was doing, but also, there's not a lot of founders out there that are selling deep tech that look like me. That's just the reality of it. Pair that with the fact that majority of investors don't look like me. And when it comes down to the research behind why is this happening, it comes down to there's not a lot of female partners at VCs. There's not a lot of limited partners investing in those VCs that are female. Typically, women tend to be more risk averse, and we typically will be more conservative in our projections, where men are more likely to share the greater vision and be more confident that they can deliver. But the biggest thing that always comes back to is there's research that shows that when women pitch to investors, they ask them to defend their product and defend their vision. And when men pitch to investors, they ask them how big they can grow it. So you're kind of coming at it from two separate angles of, there's these unconscious biases of, who can deliver and who can't. It's complicated.
I hadn't realized that, but it's disappointing to hear, but it explains a lot of what I'm seeing, right? Like, so it's frustrating to hear, it's disappointing to hear, but obviously we need to do better. For what it's worth, I'm an LP in 2 different funds. So I am trying to bring some female perspective into the startup game to the extent that I can. So not that my voice matters that much, but I think every little conversation I can have and every little piece of that journey I can be a part of, I'm happy to lean into it. What was it like when you found out that you got the investment? Like, talk to me through that, because that is a high, right? Like we want to talk about the lows, but like that's a high when you finally got the term sheet and you knew that you were going to be able to raise this capital. What was that experience like for you?
Oh my goodness. Well, the first time around I was like, okay, now what? What do I do with this? But with this company, we raised around about 2 years ago, actually. And it was a lot of a different experience. It was investors I had met before that have been following my journey, that I built actual relationships with through the last company and this one. So raising was very different. When I said, hey, we're ready, it was more of just picking the right partners to go with us. But closing the round feels so incredible to be like, I believed in this vision. It's validation that other people believe in this vision. And now I have the right resources to actually make it a reality. And there's no greater feeling to be like, I've got everything I need to be able to deliver on what I know is going to be incredible.
I can't imagine the high that is. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this, because I think on this note, we've got a lot to be proud of, right? And I feel like sadly, women do not celebrate our successes enough, right? We do something, we accomplish something, we're on to the next thing, we've got big lofty goals, and we don't pause to celebrate enough. Now, obviously, you've just shared with us a story that deserves tremendous celebration, but I'm sure you've had other moments along the way. So when you reflect back on your career, what were some of those big successful moments or your proudest accomplishments?
Oof. Yeah. I mean, so what I will say is this is something that I've been very cognizant of, specifically in our team culture. So as I'm thinking about what I'm proud of over my journey, one quick side note is that every Friday on our team call, I have our team do what I call Friday Little Joys. So it's a little joy, it's a little celebration, even if it's just like, oh, I hit a new PR in my run this week, or I had an incredible coffee. I learned how to make my new coffee maker. We celebrate these like little wins or little joys that are outside of work. I think it's so important to just pause and celebrate the positive things kind of around us. But no, there's been a couple moments. I mean, being able to be selected for Atlanta Ventures Studio as the founder that they choose to build with that year was, very humbling for me. I was a top rep at Microsoft and Salesforce, got President's Club a few years in a row. I think at Microsoft, I was one of the youngest to ever receive President's Club, which was pretty cool. I was 22 years old and got to go to Hawaii, which is amazing. So there's just been these like little moments along my career that I've got to really just like celebrate and enjoy.
I love that. I want to encourage you. It sounds like you're already building a culture around joy and success. So good for you. I appreciate people that stop and smell the roses, right? Like we're pausing to reflect. Something I think a lot of women struggle with is this idea of what's possible. And specifically, I see so many women that make it to the highest level in their domain, right? Like let's say CMOs and CTOs and CPOs. But the idea of them making the switch to a CEO feels impossible, like something they would never even consider. Mm-hmm. How did you set yourself up, I'm going to say mentally, that you could go and do the work of a CEO?
I mean, imposter syndrome is so real. It still is real, right? It's like, somebody's going to figure out I'm a fraud. They're going to figure out that I don't know what the heck I'm doing. The reality is I don't know what I'm doing and nobody knows what they're doing. Like truly, full stop. Nobody knows what they're doing. I talk to founders and CEOs of billion-dollar companies, which is kind of crazy, even just saying that out loud. I'm getting access to people I never would have had if I stayed in corporate. And founders and entrepreneurs typically are so overly giving with others because everyone has to have help along their way. So people that have done this before have helped me out. Anyway, talking to these billionaires, people that have exited unicorn companies that are like, no, I like literally thought they were going to find out I was a fraud the day before we exited for $4 billion. And that's just the reality is like nobody knows what they're doing as long as you have the right intention, you put your people first, and you have a big vision that you are confident in. Like that's all it really takes.
How do you stay so focused? Because it's so easy to be, we'll just say distracted. But I mean, listen, you can take your company a billion different directions. You can go and focus on building different products, figure out like, I've got a new ICP I want to chase, right? Like, how do you stay focused on the vision that you designed intentionally for this company?
So I think it's a bit of a complicated question because the stage that we're at, we're still pretty early. And what's really important, I think, as an entrepreneur is to choose a market you're obsessed with and not a product you're obsessed with. Because, we chose this go-to-market market, we chose the sales industry, but we've pivoted into a different product that is serving the industry. And so as I think about staying focused, I think that it is probably my biggest struggle. It's like, okay, well, this the lobbyist industry really wants to use our product, but we have to completely reskin it and have to do this. Oh, but we could sell to media. We could do this. And so the ICPs are endless. The verticalization options are endless, but having the best co-founder to be able to say, all right, Lauren, like, let's pause. Is this really something we should explore right now? Or is this something we should table and talk about in 2 months? Is the superpower, is having the right co-founder to build alongside.
I love that. This is definitely something I struggle immensely with, is like staying focused on the thing that I set out to do. because I've got so many ideas, right? And it's so easy to be distracted and want to take on these new opportunities, especially when there's revenue involved, right? How hard is it to see dollars right in front of you sitting there? You can touch it, you can grab it and say, no, you know what? This isn't the right revenue for us now. What is that like as a CEO who's trying to build this company?
Yeah, that was part of the conversation that we had pre-pivot, right? We were doing these events, we were making good money on them, and we had a couple 100,000 in contracts sitting out there where I was like, well, we can keep fulfilling these and funding the tech side of the business. But we really had to sit down and have the conversation. Like, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting there in signed contracts, but fulfilling them is taking about 40% of my time. And if I'm trying to focus on this greater vision of $1 billion company, I can't just take this to fund it. It's going to be way too distracting and won't allow us to be successful. So it is very scary to say, like, thank you for offering me all of your money, but I can't take it. It's pretty scary to do that. And it's always second guessing. Like, is that the right decision or not?
I don't know that I've ever turned down a lot of money. So I haven't been faced with that situation yet. Maybe one day I will have the opportunity to, but it's interesting to hear kind of how you have to talk yourself through that and stay kind of focused to the priorities you set out. Okay, now listen, as a young entrepreneur, CEO, founder, I have to imagine it is hard for you to figure out where your day starts and ends, right? Like, where does Lauren, CEO, founder, start and end her day versus where does Lauren, just human Lauren, get to exist? How do you kind of structure your life to introduce balance? Because every single person I invite to the show says something that I always agree with. There's no such thing as balance. Like, what is balance? So I want to hear your thoughts on that. And then I want to hear, how do you create a life that is worth living, that is not just all consuming of the business you're building?
Oh, this is something I struggle with every single day. And I think every founder and executive struggles with every single day. But I am actually a big believer in work-life integration and not work-life balance. And I think what that means is being able to step away in the middle of the day and say, you know what, I need to go for a run. I need to just clear my head really quick. And that means I do work every Saturday and every Sunday. And I kind of time box it to say I need to be done by noon so that I can actually go and live my life. But the way I structure my day to day is I wake up early, I get online, I work basically from 6 to 6. I go to the gym, I come home and I work some more, or I get together with friends who are also doing the same thing. And so I think that at least in this stage, what's vital is surrounding yourself with other people who get it and other people who are going through the same thing and are also passionate about building their vision, because then they give you a little bit more grace when you have to cancel again, or that you're late again, because they are late again as well. So it's a struggle for sure.
Okay, here's something I don't think that we ever get to talk about on this show, but I think it's something that's really important, is the realization that at some point in our life, the people around us are going to maybe change, right? The friends that you had in your teens and your 20s might not be the friends that are going to be there for you in your 30s and 40s, right? And how, as your life evolves, maybe some people can stay and evolve with you, but not everyone. How did you go on that journey? How did you surround yourself with these like-minded people? Because if I held on to all the friends I had in high school, and no offense, I love them dearly. They still listen to my podcast. They support me, but we live very different lives and our priorities are very different. And like, looking back, if we didn't have a history of friendship, we'd have zero in common. But our history is what binds us and is what will continue to keep us as friends. But like, what does that look like when you think about your network?
It has been really interesting. I mean, my journey from being in small town Nebraska to, through corporate now to being the CEO of my company and, moving to a big city and doing all these things is, those are almost feel like completely different lives. I have always joked that I am a friend collector. Like, I've been a bridesmaid in 16 weddings. My friends are so eclectic. I have friends that are like tattoo artists and friends that are motivational speakers and friends that are CEOs and friends that are stay-at-home moms. And I think that you can have different people in your life, and friends are there for a reason and they're there for a season as well. And so there are friends of mine that I dearly love, and I just now love them from afar. They're just not part of my day-to-day life. And if I ever see them again or run into them again, I would run up and give them the biggest hug, and I cheer them on through social media. But it's just not somebody that, frankly, I get as much out of the relationship, and they get as much out of the relationship. A lot of them have multiple children, and I don't have kids. And so their idea of what's fun on a Sunday afternoon is very different than what my idea of fun is. And that's okay. And I think just accepting that sometimes relationships are going to be seasonal is the best thing that you can do, because holding on to things that aren't providing value on either side is not really fruitful for anyone.
I think it's an important conversation that not just women, but everyone needs to have, right? Because to your point, there's a reason and a season, and it's okay. And you don't need to end the friendship. It kind of just goes on its own journey, right? Mm-hmm. Like I definitely have friends that have a lot of young kids. I have friends that are older who are navigating divorces, right? Like we're all at different stages in our lives with different careers and different priorities. And it's just trying to figure out, right? Like, how do these serve me and how do I serve them? Because it should be mutually beneficial, right? Friendships are not like family. They should be something where both parties are getting what they need from it, and it should be fulfilling and it should be easy. Gosh, we need to emphasize the easy in friendships a little bit more. It should not be that much work. And no, I don't want to go hang out at the playground with your 3-year-olds. I'm just going to say that now. Sorry, I love you all, but I don't want to go watch your kids play in a seesaw.
That's true.
I'm just not there anymore, right? Like my kids looking at colleges. We're not on the playground anymore. Okay. All right. Well, the other thing that I think is really important for anybody, but I love to emphasize this in women, is a growth mindset. Mm-hmm. How do you continue to evolve and grow? Like, what are the commitments that you make to yourself as part of your daily life that make sure that you're continuing to invest in yourself?
This is so real. And actually kind of goes back to your last question about, how do you find the right communities to surround you? And I really do believe the anecdote stat that says you become the 5 people that you surround yourself with. And I joined a female founders entrepreneur group. And truly, this was years ago. And truly, some of those women are my best friends. And they're the people I surround myself with daily. And actually, 2 of the women and I, every 6 months, we do a whole life map check of like, these are the areas of our lives. Here's how important they are to us. And here's what we're doing well. And then we hold each other accountable. But another thing that we do is we're like, let's do something that scares us every month together. And so we've done things like aerial yoga. We've gone on stage in front of 300 people and done stand-up comedy. We've gone to drag shows. We've done the craziest things, but it's just all about continuing to grow and push ourselves and not become stagnant. And I think it's so important to have the people around you to push you to do that.
I love that so much that I'm going to propose something here live for everybody to hear. So this will live in perpetuity. Lauren, you did share with me that you are going to be moving to New York.
Yes.
So my ask of you is when you get here and in warmer weather, because I don't leave the house when it's cold, in warmer weather, I want to do something with you that pushes us outside of our comfort zone, because that's probably not something I do enough. I definitely don't lean into my fears the way that you're describing right now. And I definitely don't have a group of friends that are encouraging me to do that. So I'm going to ask you to adopt me for one event where you take me and we go do something that neither of us has done before and that feels completely uncomfortable.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I'm so in. And I would love any suggestions for anybody listening of crazy things that Kristi and I should do.
Okay, crowdsourcing the idea seems interesting now. So now we've given you, our listeners, the power to then come back and to suggest to us when Lauren makes her way to New York and it's warmer. I'm going to continue to emphasize that. I really do not want to leave the house when it's cold. What should we do? Okay, so I think that's a great question to put out there. I've not crowdsourced our podcast listeners before, so I'm excited for that. Yeah. All right, Lauren, I think that's a great segue to bring us to the end of our show today. But before we wrap up, what is the one thing you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think that there's no right career journey. Nothing's linear. You may go up the ladder, you may get down the ladder, you may create your own ladder. But the one thing I always say is if somebody doesn't give you a seat at the table, then create your own damn table. That's it.
I love that. And you know what? I hope for anyone who's young and listening to this also embraces that, because I feel like too often very early in our lives, high school, middle school, right? Like we oftentimes feel like we need to be accepted, we can actually be the builders and create our own circle and, to your point, our own table. So Lauren, I think that is tremendous advice. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, and I can't wait to do crazy things with you in New York.
I know. I'm actually terrified, Lauren. I'm not going to lie. I'm actually more terrified what people are going to recommend. And I'm just going to say this now. My husband, who is my number one listener and fan, you are absolutely not allowed to recommend skydiving. So he has been pushing for that for years and years and years. And I told him, I said, as a married father, you are not allowed to go jump out of a plane. You just can't. So you cannot recommend that. All right. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story with us. So inspiring. I'm super excited to follow along and see where this journey takes you. More excited to have you come to New York and selfishly have an adventure with you myself. But for folks listening, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
Hi guys, I want to share a bit about an organization that I support called Wednesday Women. They're on a mission to increase the visibility of executive women leaders that you should know, learn from, and be inspired by. On LinkedIn, they share the profile of 2 amazing women each week, on Wednesdays, of course. And now just imagine if we all followed, amplified, and nominated the women that we want to see more of. Their initiative provides examples of women CEOs, founders, sales executives, technical leaders, and so many more. By supporting Wednesday Women, you'll see more of these professionals in your social feeds, of course, but also on stages, podcasts, and panels. If you're interested in learning more and supporting their initiative, head over to www.wednesdaywomen.org or follow them on LinkedIn.